Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, really appreciate it. This week's a little different. I'm speaking with Dewey Reynolds, and we're going to, of course, talk about his life, but we're going to spend most of the time talking about his parents' life. He wrote a book about them. A lot of things to unpack there. They were a couple in the 60s in Kansas City, lived a very interesting life, a life of crime. A lot of different things there between just how they linked up, the crimes that they committed, and then also an extra layer to it is they were a white male and a black female, an interracial couple in a time where that was not accepted. It was actually illegal in Missouri. So just a lot of things to unpack, a lot of really interesting things. Dewey is a great person to kind of share that scene. We talk about just the life that they led, what happened with him. Of course, he was born kind of right in the middle of all of it. I'll let him just kind of describe that. But he was put into the foster care system. His life afterwards, and kind of aging through the foster care system, and then meeting and having a relationship with his mother after that. It was a fascinating conversation. It was different this week. One, because we're talking about his parents and not. I don't have the guests on just to talk about themselves. And then also, I guess it was interesting because we're kind of telling the story of people. I've done that a few times rather than just a straight interview. We kind of cover the book and tell a little bit of a story of Dewey Reynolds' parents and the life of crime that they led. I think you're really going to enjoy this, and a lot of layers to it, like I already said. But overall, it's just a really interesting, fascinating story. So without further ado, here is Dewey Reynolds. I'm here today with Dewey Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, how are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm good. We've got a very interesting topic to cover, but before we jump, I guess, back into the 60s, introduce yourself, if you would.
My name is Dewey B. Reynolds. I am a resident of my hometown, Kansas City, Missouri. I'm a 25-year employee with the Internal Revenue Service. My hobbies include traveling, roller skating, reading, writing, being adventurous, and just exploring life.
I like that, and I think that's an interesting connection with the roller skating. I am not a roller skater at all, but actually, my wife, while we are filming this, is actually at a roller skating rink. She's gotten back into roller skating. So, how you got any tips for her? This is her third week back at it since she was a kid.
Well, I've been skating pretty much all my life. I'll be 58 in another week.
Uh-huh.
So I would say try not to fall on the floor and let a pile of people fall upon you. So
I think
if
that's
you're going to fall, make sure you fall in an isolated area on the floor and not with a bunch of people falling on top of you.
I like that. Yeah, I think you're probably one of those people she talked about last week, because I was like, how did things go? I always asked, did you fall? And she said, there are people there that are a little older than I am that clearly come every week, that they are skating backwards. They're dancing. Like she said, I want to get to that level. That Dewey's at that level, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm as an older guy, I'm still able to keep up with the youngsters out at the skating rink.
I love it. Well, let's kind of get to the topic that we are here to talk about. Believe it or not, it's not roller skating. It's about a book that you wrote, and a couple that you wrote a book about that I think were involved in some nefarious things. So let's start with, how did you know this couple?
Well, the couple was my parents, and they were an interracial couple from the 1960s at a time of serious social unrest. There was a lot of upheaval. And of course, by then, that time period, the civil rights movement pretty much was kicked into high gear. And They actually were criminals together. They lived a criminal life together, and having been put in foster care at 6 months, and then after I was emancipated out the system, I went into the Division of Family Service and I received some records about my stay in the foster home. And those records had mentioned that my mother and father were both hardened criminals. And it briefly explained their some of the crimes that they had committed. So I decided to research even further and go to the Kansas City Police Department headquarters in downtown Kansas City and start researching more into their criminal background. And what I came up with was just truly astounding. I mean, I just cannot believe that as a white man and a black woman, as an interracial couple during that time period, some of the things that they were doing together.
Yeah, and it was going to be a question later, but I think that you kind of touched on. I wondered where you were in all this. So you were in the foster care system. What happened with you during this entire time? You said you were emancipated. Did you spend your childhood in the foster care system for the entirety of it, or?
Yes, I did. My parents actually abandoned me when I was 6 months old.
Hmm.
And while they had this body house, which was a good time house, which was like drugs and prostitution and liquor and gambling and contraband, cigarettes, you name it. I was a baby in this house. So because of the fact I was in the midst of all this, I guess they felt like my safety was pretty much at jeopardy. So they had dropped me off at someone's house that they really didn't really know too well, and they just never did come back. And so I would find out years later how and why I ended up in the system.
Hmm. So tell us
Mm.
just a little bit more about your parents, I guess exactly what they were involved in. We've got a little bit of a taste, but talk a little bit about exactly what what criminal acts they were doing there in Kansas City.
Okay, well, of course, my mother worked the streets and she was out there hustling and everything. And my father was out there doing the same. And it's really, really strange how they met up because he was actually, he was a pimp. He was a procurer, as they say in law enforcement terms. And he saw her out there. So she got arrested for soliciting. And he went and bailed her out of jail. And he had already had a house that he had been operating for, prostitution. He had girls working for him, drugs, cigarettes, liquor, and of course, he was involved with some of the Italian gangsters there in Kansas City with Vice and everything. So he wanted her to help him run that house. So he put her in charge of the girls. So she like became the madam of like four or five of the girls that were out on the streets for him. So they pretty much became a pretty good team in a life of crime. So that's how they really came together and was able to embark upon this journey as far as being an interracial couple involved in criminal activities together. And they were, like I said, they were involved in drug trafficking, prostitution, bootleg whiskey, hijacking, petty larceny, robbery. I mean, you name it, they was pretty much involved in a little bit of everything.
So what, I mean, you said that he saw her in the streets and then she was arrested. He bailed her out, and then he kind of put her in charge of all of these different, I guess, things that he was doing. What I mean, did they have a relationship before that? What did he see in her that he decided that she was gonna be who he gravitated towards?
Well, he knew she had skills as a hustler, and she knew the streets, and he knew the streets, and they knew that coming together in Vice that they could really make some money, in which they did. They never became rich, of course, but they made some pretty, I guess you can say, pretty good money in Vice. And but as far as like the prostitution racket, he knew that he could, because she knew the streets and everything. She was out there, so he knew that the girls that worked for him rather. My mother could groom them, and then the tricks who would come to the house, collect the money, go upstairs, make sure that everybody behaved themselves. There wasn't, no ruckus going on and everything. So as far as the prostitution end, with him having four or five girls on the street for him, he knew that she could definitely handle that end. But as far as the drugs, the bootleg whiskey, the stolen fence goods, the hijack goods, him and a good friend of his pretty much controlled that end of it.
Gotcha. We're already talking so much about these people. I don't think what are their names? We didn't even say their names.
Okay, my father's full name was Gordon McCoy Reynolds. My mother's full name was Alame Reynolds, and that's who they were. That's who their names were.
Gotcha. I gotcha. And
Mhm.
talk to us a little bit about Kansas City at that time. I know that I mean Kansas City has been known in the past for lots of different things. I get there's definitely some criminal history there for way back, and even definitely kind of active in the '60s. So talk about Kansas City if you would.
Wow. First of all, Kansas City has a very rich history of organized crime of the mafia,
Mhm.
dating all the way back to, oh, I want to say the very early 1900s. And of course, they were very much, I guess you can say, in alignment or had a very, I guess you can say, close relationship with the Chicago mob because those cities were definitely there in the Midwest. But during the 1960s, when my mother and father were involved in crime together, Vice was definitely at an all-time high. I mean, you had like prostitution, you had drug trafficking, you had wow, I guess you could say you had just murders, strong arm robbery, burglary, and larceny, and a lot of that was centered around organized crime. And my mother and father, you could say, was at the I guess you could say at the centerpiece of all that. And when you research Kansas City history, especially during that time, there was a lot of vice out on the street. There was a lot of things going on, and a lot of crime was at an all-time high. And from the research that I did, I was amazed just to find out how so many individuals, whether no matter what type of ethnic groups they came from, black, Italian, Jewish, Irish, you name it, were pretty much got their little stronghold or whatever, got their little piece of the action, as we would say. And I mean, it's just so much. And then, of course, the Kansas City mob eventually got involved with the casinos out in Las Vegas. But there's a rich history of organized crime that started in the very early 1900s during the Al Capone, even during the Al Capone era, all the way up until I don't know about today because things are different now. I would say all the way up at least until like the early 80s.
So did they both come to Kansas City from other places, or were they from there? I just wonder if they came there because of the crime, or they were kind of brought up into that world.
Well, they both were natives of Kansas City. They both were born here in Kansas City. My mother was born in 1931. My father was born in 1905. They were like 26 years apart. And I guess at an early age, they both gravitated to the streets, and they felt like because I don't believe neither one of them really worked a legitimate job a day in their life. So vice or crime was pretty much, their way of making a living, of supporting themselves and everything. So yeah, they pretty much, like I said, I mentioned to you earlier, they knew the streets. They knew what was going out there. They knew how to deal with other criminals and everything. So they felt as though there was a lot of money to be made in Vice, and that's why they gravitated towards each other because they felt as though if they put their heads together, hey, we can do some things with all the money that is to be made in Vice.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
I want to kind of just. I never want to assume anybody knows things. It seems pretty easy, but we're saying the word vice a lot. That is in your book too. That's
Yeah,
vice is really just simply kind of another word for doing things you shouldn't be doing, crime, that type of thing. Correct?
right.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So tell us too that because there's another layer that we've already touched on, and that
Mhm.
is that they were an interracial couple in a
Yeah.
time that mattered quite a bit. So talk about how they navigated that.
Wow, that was a tough one because before my mother died in 1999, but before she died, I would ask questions. I got to meet her, and I got to know her, and we kind of like forged a relationship with each other. But she would tell me how, I guess you could say, they live what is called dangerously on the edge. And there were like racist cops. She even told me they had a run-in with a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan that was on the outskirts of Kansas City, and they would constantly getting death threats. And actually, their union, them being involved with each other, was actually on the books as considered to be illegal. under the anti-miscegenation laws. And Missouri was one of the states that outlawed, the cohabitation or the sexual relations of interracial couples. But they pretty much knew the odds that they were going to be against even before they came together. But once they came together, they ran into major problems, and they pretty much were taking their lives into their own hands being involved, because not only did they have to deal with the legal system, but they also had to deal with the criminal element out on the streets too, as far as like disapproving of their inner, because they were actually involved as a couple as far as relationship wise, as far as like intimacy or sex or just being in love or whatever, but also they also were involved as far as being criminals together too in that facet.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I mean, you said that you met your mother at some point. I just wonder what what that was like, what that kind of relationship was like, and then also how long did this life of crime last? Was there a time, once you met her that was in the rear view, or was that something that was still kind of happening up until 1999 when she passed?
Oh yeah. Well, up until the time she died at the age of 68, but she had I guess you can say retired from the streets. Both of them did, because you can only do that for so long. You can't retire like a job and get a pension, or whatever. But the bottom line is, I guess it ran its course, and from what she told me, what really ended their little crime spree together, as far as like running the body house of, like, again, the prostitution, the drugs, the bootleg whiskey, and etc., the gambling, was the fact that Vice had kicked in on them and shut them down. And they had avoided the law. They had, I guess you could say, skipped around or danced around the law for so long. But we all know that nothing lasts forever. So Major Vice had kicked in because had been investigating them, as well as investigating other people in Vice throughout the city. And they pretty much shut them down. And they ended up actually doing jail time for that. So once they got out of jail, like, they knew that was it. There was no more of that.
So now we're using the word vice kind of like in the Miami vice world, we're talking about the law, the police, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Right, right. So how long did they spend in jail?
I want to say, I believe my mother told me a little over 2 years. Yeah, they both were, convicted together. He ended up doing time somewhere near, I would say, St. Joseph, Missouri. She ended up doing time in a woman's prison in Chillicothe, Missouri. Yeah. And when they got out, they came back together and, started their life together. Not in crime, but as far as relationship wise. Yeah.
And they were involved in so many different things. What people finally get arrested for is always kind of an interesting thing. What is it that they actually got locked up for?
Well, it was like a series of crimes, like
Hmm.
like when they kicked in, Vice had finally, well, they'd been watching them, but they didn't know they were being watched. But when the major Vice squad kicked in on them in their body house, their good time house, however you would classify it, um, they found the drugs, they found the bootleg whiskey, they found the contraband cigarettes. The prostitute, there were like maybe a couple of their prostitutes upstairs with the tricks. And of course, they also found illegal firearms in the house. So they had enough on them to really, give them some serious. But I guess maybe they was able to, whoever their lawyers were able to talk the judge down or talk the prosecutors down. But when they kicked into the home, they found everything, and then they knew that was the beginning of the end right there.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I guess what year was this? Could they have gotten in trouble for that interracial relationship, or was this after loving, or when was this?
Oh yeah, they had been warned. I think my mother was telling me they had been given, instead of just outright arresting them and taking them to jail for, being involved as an interracial couple under the anti-miscegenation laws, they were given warnings, but they just didn't take heed to it. But when they were arrested for their bisexuality, I think them being arrested had nothing to do with, them committing the crime of being an interracial couple under that law. But of course, they had been told, you can go to jail for a long time. You might not even see the outside again. But they were just like, okay, we're still gonna. They were just determined to keep doing what they were doing. But I remember an incident where my mother told me that there was a white police officer that came to their little good time body house where all the vice was going on at, and said that he walks in the house and he looks at my mother and then he points across the room and says to her, "Is that your white pimp over there?" So I was like, "Wow, that's pretty interesting."
Hmm. Yeah, and you talked about Kansas City definitely during that time being very, active with different mob type things, and
Mhm,
then all the different pockets. So
mhm.
were your parents, because obviously the mob, I mean, they kind of have their fingers in a lot of things, and they don't really like a lot of competition. So
Yes, sir.
were they kind of doing their own thing just under the radar, not enough to get caught up in that, or were they involved in any of the mob activity?
Yeah. Well, my father, his heritage was Irish. He was an Irishman. Um, he had actually, from what I understand, and then there's some of them gangsters are mentioned in police reports. Because see, when I was doing my research, the police department gave me like, oh God, like many pages of police reports, and then his criminal rap sheet. And I'm seeing these Italian names, and a couple of them sound very familiar. So he had a good relationship with those guys. But here's the deal, though. As with Kansas City, Chicago, Detroit, New York, Cleveland, you name it, if you were involved in vice, you had to kick back part of your vice proceeds to the mob. And
Mhm.
if you didn't, you were either intimidated, beaten, or killed. So, if you were out there making money in vice, you were well advised to give them a piece of your action. So my father knew that, and which he did. He paid tribute to those guys, through his money he made through vice and everything, because he knew that's how it was. And other people knew too that the Italians, as far as organized crime and the mafia and vice and all that, they knew that the Italians were the king of the hill. So if you were going to be involved in vice, if they didn't come to you directly and told you, someone out on the streets told you, yeah, those Italians are going to want part of your vice money. So you had to pay those guys.
I gotcha. I gotcha. So
Mhm.
so after they both got out of prison, they got back together. The life of crime was over with, but they kind of built a life together. Were they together until your father's passing? You said your
Mhm.
mother's passing. I assume he passed
Uh,
before her.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, he passed in 1978. I believe I was 13 years old. And they had, like I said, come. They even went on to get married,
Mm.
And of course, I'm at all the while I'm still in foster care. But of course, he had died. I met him about a month before he died for the first and only time. And then, of course, she would die like 21 years later, 1999. But they had pretty much decided to stay together all that time. When long after they put me in foster care, and long after they had left their life of crime behind, after they had ran its course and everything.
Gotcha. And how much, obviously, a ton now, you even wrote a book, but
Mhm.
during all this time, as a kid, did you know anything about any of this, or was it a complete shock once you started
Mm.
researching it?
I had been told stories, and of course my foster mother and I had my mother had a younger sister that I would visit from time to time. She would tell me stories too about who they were and what they were involved in, why, because I'd always wondered, why did I end up in the system? Why did I end up in? They told me, well, your mother and father, your mom and dad were both hardened criminals. They were out there in the streets. They were living a very dangerous lifestyle. While you were a baby, you were actually in that house while that vice was going on. So in order to, like, I guess not put you in harm's way, they had to take you somewhere and and let, as far as like take you somewhere to safety, where you would be safer. And I didn't understand it at first, but I would later go on as I matured to understand that.
So, what do you think, as far as hearing about that, growing up in a very non-conventional way? I mean, how do you think that's shaped where you're at now as a person in your 50s?
Well, I just knew I never wanted to take the same path that my mother and father took, and I felt like there was a better life for me out there. And but I also understood that these were two people who just were determined not to work a 9 to 5 and live, within the conventionalities of everyday American life and live by their own rules. And as far as like me growing up and understanding who they were and what they did, I just came to the resolve that that was just a life that wasn't for me. That's just something I did not want to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, it does sound like you had at least a little bit of relationship with your mother.
Yes.
Um, I mean, what was that like? Was there any kind of resentment for what happened with all that, or was it just you trying to get an understanding and make
Mhm.
what you could of it, or what that look like?
Well, that I would say for I went through my period of bitterness and resentment, and but I think as time went on, I decided not to really like let it get the best of me, and they did what they did. There's nothing I can do, nothing that I can do to go back and change that. So, but once I got to know her better and understood like who she was and where she came from and why she did what she did and everything, it really just let me know that she was her own person. Not to excuse what her and my father did and the kind of life that they led, but at the same time, I learned a lot from her. I learned she was a very wise lady. She may have been involved as a hardened criminal all those years, but she was very wise. She had a lot of wisdom and she had a lot of knowledge, and she knew the streets, and she would pass on some of that wisdom to me. And I said, wow, that's something that I can learn from, and maybe I can go on and live a much better, productive life.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I've talked to a lot of people in the in the law enforcement side of things, and
Mhm,
a lot of people have said just that a lot of criminals and some of the best ones, it's
mhm.
not easy being a criminal. It's pretty hard. It takes somebody that's really smart, and if people
Oh,
were to take that knowledge and use it for good, then I mean they could change the world. So I don't it doesn't surprise me at all that she was a wise person.
yeah, absolutely. She gained a wealth of knowledge and wisdom out there in those streets, and her relations with some of the most hardened people you can imagine, some of the most criminally insane people. But like I mentioned to you earlier, my friend, they lived a very dangerous lifestyle. They lived on the edge, and it's amazing. And when I look back and having researched their background and her giving me her own version of what happened while they were out there and the whole time they were together doing what they were doing, it's amazing that they survived that
Yeah, it
because
is.
they were in the midst of a lot of dangerous situations.
Yeah, it is amazing for a lot of different reasons. I mean, it's hard when it comes to living that type of lifestyle and crime to make it out, and then of course having that extra layer of having people against you just for being who they were as a couple. I think that it took some smarts to navigate that for sure.
It definitely did. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah.
Mhm.
So I want to talk about how you came to write the book, but
Mhm.
have we covered your parents? You think in a good light? Is there anything else you want to add about them?
I believe, as far as both of them being concerned, I believe they deep down they were good people. They they may have done bad things, but they weren't bad people.
Hmm.
And I believe that there was like periods. Now they did not neither one of them told me this, but I just believe there were probably periods where they wanted to get out of that life and walk the straight and narrow. But I believe that life just kept calling their name because, like I said, you feel as though, okay, we can venture off into this type of vice activity and venture off into this, and we can make more money. We can keep doing it. And I guess it was that adrenaline rush. But at the same time, I think they both came to the realization like this can't last forever. Eventually it's going to come to an end. And then when you look around you and you out there living that dangerous lifestyle, and you looking at how so many of them end up in jail for the rest of their life or end up getting killed, like, okay, if we don't cut this out, we're going to go down that same path. We're going to end up dead, or we're going to end up in prison for the rest of our lives.
I hear that for sure, and I don't really know everything about your parents, of course. But you said that they were good people that were doing bad things, which I certainly understand that. Were they involved in anything that was actually, I guess, physically harming other people? I mean, we talked about prostitution, we talked about drugs, and of course that's something in itself. But were they? I mean, did they do anything as far as assault or murdering anybody?
Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question. Now, on my father's behalf, when I looked at his, when I looked at those police reports, of course, I found some on both of them, my mother and father, and them did things together. But especially when I look at his criminal rap sheet, which he had like 58 criminal convictions, spanning for like over almost 30 years. He spent a lot of time in the prison system. But I mean, like, say for instance, like one of his crimes was like strong arm robbery. One of them was like assault and battery. Another one was suspicion of murder. Another one was drug trafficking. Another one was compulsory prostitution. Another one was coercion or something, petty larceny. The list went on and on. If I was to take, I never heard it from my mother. Definitely didn't hear it from him. But if I was to take a stab at it, I do believe there's a chance he was involved in a murder or two
Mm.
because of who he was and the life he led. Because before he joined up with my mother, he had his own criminal life,
Mm.
things that he was doing before they came together. And he was definitely involved with some serious stuff with some of the Italian gangsters. Because I give you a good example: hijacking. Hijacking trucks was a big thing, especially during that time period in the 50s and 60s. Like, for instance, like they would get tipped off about uh, commercial trucks coming into town carrying whiskey and cigarettes and beer and frozen meats. So they would assemble a team, and they would find out the route that the truck was going to drop off those commodities, and they would hijack the truck. That's how he got a lot of those commodities in his criminal body house and everything, through hijacking. He was doing some hijacking work for the Italian gangsters in Kansas City.
So how do you think, because even though you didn't grow up, directly involved with them, there's still
Mhm.
plenty of instances that it continues on. So how do you think that you broke that cycle?
Well, like I said, when I looked at the life that they led and who they were as people and everything, I just came to the resolve that there has to be something better out there, and I would not want to follow in their footsteps. I mean, like you said, one black sheep in the family is enough, and so therefore, having grown up in the system and eventually learning about their lifestyle and who they were and what they did, and knowing that's not the way to go. I mean, because there's got to be something better out there. I mean, as far as like trying to get a good education, trying to be productive in life, trying to treat people the way I want to be treated. So therefore, I did everything I did to try to not be the people that they were,
I
and I worked
understand.
hard at that, and I think it kind of paid off to some degree.
I think so too. And I mean, we're kind of leaving you emancipated. The great thing about, well, I mean, the bad thing about obviously growing up that way is you don't have, a ready-made family. But the great thing is you get to pick your own family and your own support system. So talk
Yes.
about, I guess, the support system and the family that you've picked and that you've been able to build. I don't want to just leave you at 18 off on your own. I'm sure you've had a lot of experience outside of just the IRS over these years.
Oh yeah. Because I've never been married, no children, but as far as like support, oh yeah, I mean I've got support from friends and acquaintances and associates and co-workers and church members and such. And I mean I've been fortunate to be surrounded by some very encouraging people that that pretty much that will cheer you on and tell there's a lot more with your life that you can do. And of course they were some of the same people that encouraged me to write this book,
Mm.
because a very good friend of mine is the one that encouraged me to write Two Shades of Ice, my book about my parents and everything. And he said, yeah, that's a great story. He said, you setting on a really great story, because the story within itself is very unique. Because we didn't. I'm gonna speak for myself, and maybe other people. I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think there's been too many stories ever told about an interracial couple during the 1960s that were heavily involved in vice together, led a life of crime together. So it was very unique, and a good friend of mine encouraged me to really buckle down and write the book.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to talk about the book for sure. So you said a good friend kind of encouraged you, and maybe that's kind of what gave you the push that you needed. But I guess how did that come about? I mean, people can push all day for people to write something, but it takes you actually,
Mhm.
starting to type or putting pen to paper. So what that process look like?
Well, what I did for, I would say several years being 3, 4, maybe 5 years, consistently, I've been gathering material on them, like, police reports, criminal rap sheets, and, information my mother had given me about them together. And having sat down and read through the narratives, through the police reports, and then just really looking at both of their rap sheets and everything, and then getting in touch. Because see, what's crazy, I tell you, was real. This is gonna sound crazy, but my father did time in prison in 5 different states, which included California, Arizona, Missouri, Texas, and Illinois.
Hmm.
And so I reached out to some of those police departments in Arizona, one police department in Arizona, one in Texarkana, Texas. For example, he had done, oh man, we're talking 5 or 6 years. I don't know how. In 1944, he had went down to Dallas, Texas, and stole a lot of gas ration coupons, which was issued by the government during the war. And of course, he got busted with a friend of his, and that was one of the crimes he committed that was mentioned on his rap sheet. So I reached out to the Dallas Police Department. They sent me the full report about what happened before he was arrested for that crime. Of course, he did time in the federal penitentiary in Texarkana, Texas for that. But it explained the names of the people involved, the locations and all that. And then even in California and then in Illinois too. So I had a lot of material to work with to write the book. Plus I had the Kansas City Police Headquarters had given me their police mug shots, and matter of fact, when I was telling you about how Vice had kicked in on them, there's a police photo of them standing right next to each other that had been taken. Then individual police mug shots of them holding up the numbers and all that. So I had a wealth of information to really sit down and really write a full length true crime book about their life together.
Hmm. So how common knowledge was this in your circle and in your friend group? Because I just think it would be interesting if you had written this book and everybody's like, "Whoa, I had no idea the past that you have, your parents had." Was this something that people already knew about, or was this a shocker for a lot of people that knows Dewey?
Oh, it was definitely a shocker because of the fact that a lot of them never knew I was in foster care for almost my whole young life. Coming up as a child on into my teen years until, like I said, I was emancipated out the system. But it was really a shocker to them. Like I said, the big shocker was, okay, we talking, because I was born in 1964. They met in 1958, 59 or whatever. Then because I was born in 64. But to know that an interracial couple had come together during that time period to be heavily, I do mean heavily involved in vice, in a lot of criminal activities together and everything. A lot of people was like, whoa, wow. Like I mentioned earlier, I've never heard of a story like that. That's kind of extremely unconventional because back then I would hear people say, well, back then, shoot, if you was an interracial couple, man, they probably found both of y'all dead somewhere. They didn't play that back then, which is true. It was very taboo, and it was just a definite no. So a lot of people they were like up and like on it, like, my God, I've never heard a story like that. So the shocker was there.
Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
sure of that. And I kind of looked at some of the reviews on Amazon, and the thing that I want to kind of understand with it,
Mhm.
how did you tell the story? Is it, biographical, factual type thing? Is it kind of more of a true story that you've kind of written a novel and had to fill in some blanks? Because that's what
Yeah.
somebody said, something about like it was based on a true story. So I assume obviously you don't know every conversation that happened, so you have to take a little bit of liberties. But how exactly did you approach that?
I'm glad you asked that question. Um, Between, like I said, really studying the police reports, studying the rap sheets, going on information for what my mother told me. even going on information from what her younger sister told me, where she was not involved in that life, but she knew some things. And even after my mother died, she would tell me stories and everything. And then I actually heard stories from a couple of people out on the streets that were, pretty much around their age group, that was around during that time that who knew them personally too. So you mentioned filling in the gaps. Yeah, it's like I said, like I mentioned on the cover of the book, is based on a true story, which most of the information that you will see in the book or read in the book is definitely based on factual information. But I will say there is that element of embellishment. There's some embellishment going on. So when you bring all that together, it really basically comes together and tells a really great story. And there are some things that's not so much 100% factual, but it all ties in together. There's that uniformity that brings the entire story together.
Gotcha. I gotcha. So
Mhm.
what, in saying all that, what do you hope people, I guess, take away after they finish that last page? What do you hope people take away from it all?
I think I believe what they'll take away from it is two individuals who dared to defy the odds, even though they were both criminals. And eventually it turned into almost like a love story at the end because they found out that they had more in common than just being criminals together and trying to make money in that criminal life together and everything. And that truly that if two people love each other, they will find a way to work around, all the things that are thrown at them, all the bad things that people have to say, or the people that try to come together and break them up and disband what they tried to do and everything. But I do believe that people will learn that even though you know some people may start out in a bad situation, it can turn into something good, and that's what I think they'll learn all the way up to the last page. That these are two people who learn that we have to leave this life behind. We got to try to become legitimate, and there's something better out there for us, and we can reinvent ourselves, and we can reinvent our lives, and we can do something more productive in society.
I got you. I think that's an
Mhm.
important lesson for sure.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like you had one story in you and you've told what you need to tell? Did you get the writing bug and want to write more, or where are we at with you as an author?
Oh yeah, I felt the need to. Well, actually, I have started another story. I'm working on it slowly but surely about my life in foster care. About
Hmm.
what my life was like. After because the story ends where my mother was actually pregnant with me,
Hmm.
and how the story branches out from there and talks about me trying to find them, me trying to understand why I ended up in foster care and what landed me there, and what life was like day to day in this foster home that I did live in.
I think that'd be an interesting story. You have to let me know when that one comes out. We can talk about that one. But I want
Oh,
to I want to, I guess, kind of end things on how can people pick up this book? How can people connect with Dewey as a whole?
well, the book is available. It's available on Amazon.com. It's in ebook form. It's in a soft cover form and everything. But I also want to mention that Kirkus Reviews said that the author, who is myself, skillfully captures the characters, which I believe I did. And you know, um, there are things mentioned in the book that I could never really come straight out and talk about as I'm doing this interview with you, as
Hmm.
far as the sex and the violence and the language and all that. But I strongly recommend that people read the book to kind of like, as we would say, get some teeth into your bite. And that way you won't be missing not one iota of the entire story because it's a very powerful story. But yes, the book is available at Amazon.com, and just go there and look for Two Shades of Vice, based on the true story of an interracial couple's life together in crime. And of course, it was written by me, the author, Dewey B. Reynolds.
I got you. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Dewey. I really appreciate your time.
But I appreciate you having me. I really do. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So that was Dewey Reynolds. Enjoyed speaking with him immensely. Learned a ton about him. Of course, a ton about his parents. It's a fascinating story. That's for sure. Just I couldn't imagine, one, living the life that they led. Two, dealing with the issues that they dealt with in an interracial couple. I myself am in one of those. I'm married to someone of Asian descent, so I couldn't imagine being persecuted because of who you loved. So of course they did a lot of things wrong, but I that was not one of them. But in their time, that was something they had to navigate. So I enjoyed speaking with Dewey. We talked a ton about them, but of course Dewey's an amazing guy, and just we could have unpacked so much more. Just the things that he's overcame. Growing up in the foster care system, turning into the great person that he has. Writing this book, I'm in awe of Dewey as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to hear more about his parents' story, of course, pick up the book. He covered the highlights. It goes into way more detail on their crimes, on them, on the situation. So if you're interested in hearing more, definitely pick up that book. I urge you to do that. The link for that will be in the show notes. Dewey's contact will be in the show notes. If this is your first time listening, urge you to check out other episodes. A lot of great guests, a lot of great ones coming up. If you've listened before, whether it's once or 100 episodes, and you haven't already, please go give 5 stars on Apple, give 5 stars on Spotify. I appreciate that. If you go into Apple and you leave a written review, even more amazing. Great guests coming up next week as well. Take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time, where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or, hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.